Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Dan's Models. This is John here, and I'm sitting with Dan, also sitting with Trevor Park from the Fern Creek and Western. That's the garden railroad that we go to fairly frequently in Santa Cruz. And we're doing something different, and why don't you guys talk a little bit about what's going to happen here, because we haven't had a guest on.
No.
And we haven't done what you're going to do here ever either.
We haven't done a lot of large scale stuff.
Yeah. Trevor has.
Yeah.
That's why he's here.
That's why he's here for
thanks for
expert help.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Trevor.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
But this is a Bachmann 3-truck Shay, 120.3 scale. And we're going to convert it to battery power and install sound. And
that's what all this stuff up here.
That's what all the junk on the table is for. Is to do that, because right now it's basically stock out of the box. And we actually reviewed this engine a while back. If you want to look at the review, but anyway, I want to be able to run it off battery because
performance.
Yeah, it works better on dirty track, right? I mean,
I think the best reasons to convert to battery are the fact that most of these engines run on garden railroads, and when you have track outside, electrical conductivity through rails that are sitting outside overnight and getting wet and whatnot is not dependable in any way. And you're going to be fighting cleaning track and dealing with power issues and power drops and engine stopping and that sort of thing all the time, and you're just not going to have fun doing the hobby. So I think battery is a really great way to make the hobby and running trains worry-free and a little more fun. Ease of maintenance, I guess, is the best way of putting it.
Yeah. I could see that. Hey, you want to come over and run the trains? You mean you want to come over and troubleshoot all day?
Yeah, and the Fern Creek and Western started as a track power only railroad. That's how we started, and we ran track power for basically a year of the railroad's existence, and built the railroad to be able to use track power. And it still has track power, we just never ever used track power. And we did our very first conversion on a little 040 Porter that we were intending to use for switching, because trying to make switches work under track power is a nightmare in itself. So we were going to use the Porter as a switcher, and we started using the Porter for mainline applications more because we loved how it ran so much. And we decided, well, I think battery is the way to go. And so Eric and I made a decision at that point that the railroad would become a battery-only railroad eventually, and we were going to convert all the engines to battery. And so far we've converted, I believe, 7 of the locomotives to battery. And that is, they run absolutely beautifully after you convert them to battery.
I can actually vouch for that. I've run trains. Dan has run your trains, and they don't. Other than occasional derailments, it's flawless.
Constant derailments in the case of my number 8.
That's not my engine, though.
Right? Yeah, right. I love the disclaimer. Yeah. It's not the Fern Creek.
Hopefully this one will actually stay on the track. It's a Shay, so it should.
Well, yeah, and part of the reason I'm here is not only have I done quite a few battery conversions, because I convert all of our engines, but I've done a 3-truck Shay before. Our number 10, which is the locomotive that you see running around the railroad a lot in the videos, that is a Shay, is exactly the same as this engine in terms of the insides. It just looks a little bit different, but it's exactly the same as this engine. And so the tactics I use to convert that engine are going to work basically the same for this engine.
I'm noticing all these little components on the table, so I recognize this one because I've used this.
Yeah, that's the controller.
And
it's an air wire controller.
I see a speaker and a battery. What is all this stuff?
Well, we want to plan what we're going to do before we start actually tearing the engine apart.
That's always a good idea.
Yeah. So these are all the major components that go into this. So there's the battery and the speaker.
Yep.
And then this little thing is an air wire receiver called a converter. This actually gets the signal out of the air and converts it to DCC. Now, because this thing doesn't have enough amperage to drive a large-scale decoder, we're also putting in a Tam Valley DCC Booster. That's a 5-amp booster.
All right.
This is a switch, which will switch. It's a 4-pole DT switch, which I'll explain a little later. But this is going to allow us to run the engine either on track power or battery. And the reason I want to use track power, or at least have the option, is because I'm going to use a LokSound XL decoder, and I want to be able to program the LokSound with
on
the
a
Lok
track,
programmer,
right?
which is easiest to do with a programming track. Otherwise, I would have to wire in some other connector just to do that, and I think it's easier just to keep it from the track. And then, of course, you have your controller.
Okay.
Which we already mentioned.
One thing I'm going to mention about this controller, which is an Airwire T5000, is that this actually acts as the transmitter of signal to the converter. So this actually transmits the signal for motor control, sound functions, light functions, and all that sort of thing to the converter. The other thing is that this acts as the programmer. So for programming CVs like address or speed control and things like that, you can use this to actually program the engine. Airwire also makes something called a T1300, which is an operator throttle, but that won't allow you to program the engine. So for a first throttle for the locomotive, I would recommend getting a T5000.
I'm going to explain how this is going to work. At the center of everything is a 4-pole double throw switch with a center off.
That's that red thing, right?
That's that red thing, right.
That's this thing.
Right. So I'm going to use half the switch for the battery and half the switch for the DCC and other components. So how it's wired is the battery connects to the center terminals of half the switch, and then the switch basically has two positions. There's a track/charge position, and there's a battery position, and then center off. So when it's off, it's off. There's no power in the engine whatsoever. When it's on track/charge, the battery is connected to the charging jack, so you can connect it and charge the battery. Or you can, and at the same time, you could also have the engine on the track and run it off track power. Now, you're probably not going to charge the engine in and run it on track power at the same time, but
That's track?
that's track.
Okay. That's the only thing on here that I recognize.
Yeah, that's my little charging jack. Anyway, and then and then here's the LokSound XL. It's also wired to the center post of the other half of the switch. And again, when the switch is in the track/charge position, the DCC inputs from the LokSound connect directly to the track, just like any ordinary DCC decoder. And all this other stuff is inert. It's off. Now, if you switch it the other way, to battery, the power from the battery goes to the DCC booster, and it also splits off and goes to the converter, the receiver. The DCC out from the booster goes through the switch to the DCC in of the LokSound XL. So at that point, the the wheels are not doing anything. Okay, they're out of the circuit, and all of the power is coming from these components to the decoder. So first we need to remove the screws that hold the tender on, or the bunker part of the engine, I should say.
Yeah, wouldn't the tender be that trailing part?
Well,
Yeah.
they both kind of serve that function, but one's attached to the engine.
Yeah.
One isn't.
The proper
third
name
truck?
would be, if you're not on a Shay, you wouldn't really call it the tender. What's right behind the engine that's connected to the engine is the fuel bunker.
Right.
So that might be holding wood or coal or oil, and then the trailing
Or a battery.
or the well, no, it's not going to hold the battery on this engine. The trailing tender would be considered the water tank. So that's how you would refer to it on a real 3 truck Shay.
Anyway, this is just 2 screws. There's one here and one on the other side, the same place. Okay, so this whole assembly should just come off now. It's got a couple of clips in the front.
Oh, look at all that junk in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a spaghetti factory.
Yeah, well, that's the factory light board, and this is actually a plug that you can plug it into a like a light board socket on NCE decoder, and then these can be hooked up for motor and track power and stuff if you were just gonna do it as DCC. But even if you were gonna do it as just DCC, I would recommend ripping out the light board, just because then you can get independent control of all the lights. But no matter what, for what we're doing today with the battery, we are going to tear out the factory light board and the support that holds it up. Okay, so what we have here is the factory light board, and this is what allows the locomotive to be able to run under DC and control all the lights and smoke units and stuff like that. So we're not going to use this because, as I mentioned earlier, these connections are just for DCC if you wanted to install a really simple decoder, but it doesn't allow you to do anything beyond that. You get no independent control of the lights, no independent control of anything really. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to unsolder all these wires from the board that connect to the board from the locomotive. These wires will come out with the board. And we're going to unsolder them, and as we go through, we're going to label them as to what they are. So we know when we go back to put the LokSound board and the receiver in, we know exactly what all these wires are. So I'm just going to go through real quickly and explain what all these wires do. So the red and black wires here are the pickups for the front truck, and these red and black wires here are the pickups for the middle truck. And then the green and the gray wire here are the pickups for the rear truck. So this doesn't really follow DCC color coding, which is going to be a problem. So we're going to have to track all the wires as to where they go. And even the engine doesn't match itself because, as you can see, these pickup wires are red and black and these ones are gray and green. And the motor wires are green on this engine, and here they're pickups. So there's going to be a lot of tracking as to what the different wires mean. And also in the tender, there are different colors too. So
That's
we're gonna
awesome.
Great.
It sounds like I designed it.
Yeah.
That's as bad as that AccuCraft engine I had.
Yeah, it wasn't designed with the intention for DCC. We'll just say that much. But one nice thing is the trucks do have isolated motors, so we don't have to deal with trying to isolate motors that weren't originally isolated.
That would mean you'd have to take each truck apart.
Yeah, and that would add a lot to the project. A lot of work that would make you have headaches. Okay, so back to explaining the wires. The green and orange here, the green and orange here, and I don't know if you can see it behind the capacitor, but the black and the kind of tan wire here are the motor wires for the trucks. Each truck is what they call a power truck, so it actually has a motor in it. The locomotive truly isn't gear driven like a real Shay. It has motors in each of the trucks, but that gives it a lot more power and durability for running outside. Also, the yellow wire and the blue wire here are for the backup light, and the red wire and the white wire are for the speaker, which goes in the water tank. The violet wire and the blue wire here are for the front headlight. The yellow, the green, and the blue wires here are for the ash pan flicker. So in the ash pan of the locomotive, there's some LEDs that make a fire flicker. Then the brown, red, and orange wire here is for the firebox light. And so if you open the firebox door inside the locomotive cab, you can see the firebox flicker. These two purple wires here are for the cab light. The two pink wires are for the smoke unit. And then the rest of these wires here are for the switches that are up in the smoke box of the locomotive. And those control whether the locomotive is running under NEM or NMRA polarity. NEM's basically like the British NMRA, essentially, European NMRA. And the NMRA is National Model Railroad Association. And then the other switches are for smoke unit control and things like that. So now we're going to start unsoldering the wires from the light board. We're going to start with the track pickup wires for the front truck. So just grab the first wire with the needle nose pliers.
So now, if I understood right, what we're going to probably do here is we'll do a lot of this off camera.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of redundant.
Yeah, we have to unsolder a lot of wires.
So basically what we're doing is unsoldering like 2 wires at a time, as most of them are paired, and then we're going to label them. And then we'll unsolder the next pair of wires and label those.
Yeah, and I'm referring to a wiring diagram that came off a website called Ryman.org, and he's got a great article on his blog about how to convert a Shay to battery, and it shows the wiring diagram for what all these wires mean if you want to see a printed diagram of what they mean, and that's the diagram I'm working off of today. So now that I have these unsoldered, just make sure you know which side is left and which side is right. On the circuit board, you'll actually see it's printed that the black was the left wire and the red was the right wire.
I can see it. I can see an L and an R there.
Yeah, just pay attention to when you're actually unsoldering them as to what they were. That corresponds to the same color coding for the middle truck, as the left is black and the right is red. But it doesn't correspond to the color coding of the rear truck. However, that's not going to be important for us. Essentially, we're not going to use the back pickups, and I'll explain why we're going to do that later. But do pay attention for when you're unsoldering motor wires and stuff, as the rear motor wires aren't the same color coding as the front and middle truck motor wires. So just make sure that you know which was left, or which was motor positive and which one was motor negative. So as I said before, these are the front truck pickup wires, and now we're going to label them as to what they are so we can remember that later. So what I'm going to do is just take a Sharpie, doesn't matter what color, red is what I have on hand, and we're just going to label the piece of blue tape because it doesn't stick, as it's not sticky on the wires and it won't leave as much of a residue. And we're just going to put front, F for front, and PU for pickup. And then all we do after that is just pull the piece of tape off and just take the two pieces of wire and wrap it around the wire.
Yeah, it's really important to do stuff like this incrementally, because if you just pulled all the wires off,
yeah, you would.
Good luck figuring out what.
You would never remember what they are, and you are going to drive yourself crazy. And in the end, you'll probably hook the wrong thing up to something, and that'll be the end of that.
You might even blow up a decoder or something.
So it's really.
I've done that before, so don't do as I do, not as I say.
Yeah.
Whatever the saying is.
So we're going to go ahead then and detach and label everything that needs to be detached and labeled. And we'll come back, and through the magic of TV editing, it'll be done. It's probably going to take 2 hours.
Yeah, this is the most fun part of the conversion, I can guarantee you.
Looks like there's a bunch of stuff done here.
Well, we've pulled all the wires out that we're actually going to use and labeled them as to what they are. Yes, I know it looks like a mess, but see, they all have my beautiful handwriting on them, saying what they are.
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
So the rest of this stuff is going to get junked, basically.
Yeah.
So these remaining wires we can just cut.
Yeah. The reason we're cutting these wires and not unsoldering them is these actually lead to switches that are in the smoke box, and they control the polarity of the engine and the smoke unit on-off. Obviously, if we are going to use the smoke unit, which in this case we're probably not, but if we were to use the smoke unit, we don't need an actual switch in there because we could just control that through the DCC functions.
Oh, so you wouldn't need the switch anyway.
Yeah,
Right.
and you don't need polarity switches because it's DCC.
And it's battery powered.
And
so
it's battery power.
Right.
Well, you only need that if you're running track power.
Right.
Right.
So,
And actually, I should mention that I don't really intend to run this engine on track power. The reason I want to have the option is mostly just for programming the decoder, as I said before.
Yeah.
So that's really what it's about. So that's why it doesn't really have to operate on track power.
So, yeah, no, that sounds great. And it's nice to see that there's progress made.
yeah. And since Dan mentions that he's not going to run on track power, I think this might be a good time to explain why I was talking earlier about the fact that you don't need to pay attention to whether the back pickups are in the right order in terms of plus minus.
That's for picking up the power off the track, isn't it?
Yes.
From the rear truck.
From the rear truck.
That's
but
on the water tank.
That's on the water tank. We're going to use the first two trucks and their pickups. But the problem with using the back truck as we're doing battery is if we were going to use the pickups from the back truck as well, you'd have to put another plug in because there aren't enough prongs in this current plug to have track power coming from the back tender. So it doesn't really matter if we only have 2 trucks of pickups, because that's plenty of pickup area to pull power to program the decoder off of.
Right.
We don't need it for the rear truck. We're going to have motor wires going to the back truck, but the pickup wires that used to come for this plug are now going to be the wires for the battery coming into the locomotive.
They're kind of irrelevant because your battery is what's bringing the power, not the truck.
It just saves a lot of time having to add more plugs and stuff. So it makes more sense to just be able to use the old pickup wires and just eliminate a few of the pickups. Okay, so now that the board is free of all the wires, we can remove not only the board, but we can remove the mount that holds the board above the floor of the fuel tank. So it's just as simple as coming in with a Phillips head screwdriver and removing the screws. There's 3 screws that hold this in. And
this is another one of those things that I would find really satisfying because you can see there's progress being made.
Yeah. This is one of the more satisfying parts of the project because you get to remove the old board.
And this is basically junk at this point.
Maybe you could sell it on eBay.
Hey, John, you could save it for running things over with your car.
Oh, that might be fun.
Yeah. The next thing is we're going to remove the smoke box front to expose the switches. And you just remove these 2 screws to get the switches off. Now, you see the wires going back here. This is the smoke unit that comes with the locomotive. And there's 2 screws back in the locomotive there inside the smoke box. Okay, so the first thing to do is unscrew the switches from the smoke box itself. So that's just a matter of removing the 2 Phillips head screws that hold them in and then just pulling it out of the socket. So now we're just going to gently grab a hold of the smoke unit or the wires and just kind of gently ease it out. And in the back, Dan will be noticing that wires are moving in the fuel tender.
Yeah.
And so these are the wires that hold the switch in. So you can...
I'm just holding it so none of the other wires gets dragged through it.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to have to fish wires through the engine.
Yeah, that would be a pain. The big metal thing is the smoke unit. So, there it goes. Now it's working out.
There.
Cool. Oh, there comes a bunch of plastic pieces.
Bunch of crap.
We didn't need that anyway, right?
No, you don't need that for the smoke unit. We don't need the smoke unit.
Yeah.
And after I remove...
I'm not a big fan of smoke units.
Yeah,
So.
and after...
Dan's a non-smoker.
So we've gotten the smoke unit most of the way out. If you're wondering why I have a Band-Aid, it's because I cut myself trying to pull the smoke unit out. Because these little things are really sharp. So a word of caution: be careful with Bachmann smoke units. They can cut you.
It's a working injury.
Yeah.
We don't have disability insurance here, so
Oh no.
You'll have to defraud it somehow.
Darn. Anyway, so now we can just pull the smoke unit out. This locomotive doesn't have a light board like most Bachmann engines, and that's very strange. And because most of them, what they'll have is they'll have the smoke unit screwed to the light board, which is screwed into the boiler, but they don't, which is very odd. But that saves us a lot of time because therefore that means that the wires for the headlight don't run into a light board in the boiler, so we don't have to do any cutting inside the boiler for the wires, which actually saves some time.
I think maybe the smoke unit wires will just cut. Yeah. And just leave them in there in case I ever want to do that. I mean, I don't think I will, but
that's fine. So
at least that I don't
do
have
the honors, Dan.
I don't have to fish wires through the engine later at some point.
And now we can remove the switches out of the engine. And Dan, you might want to pull the smoke unit wires back just a tiny bit so we can tuck them in the boiler. There. Okay, now I can just pull the switch. This is, by the way, the most satisfying part of the project is you can pull that long string of wires. And now we're done working in the smoke box, and I'm done bleeding. So now we can put the smoke box cover back on the locomotive.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. Join us in a couple of weeks when we finish the project on our next episode of Dan's Models.